We've been lucky to hit the ground running since the return of the program this month. Of course, we started out with a few strong NYPD interviews, namely our previous episode of the Mike the New Haven podcast, which we welcome you back to, that being with former Suffolk County Police Commissioner and NYPD Chief of Department Rodney Harrison. Of course, we had Dave Riley, and on the media side, we had Roger Clemens, who, of course, helped the Yankees to 2 world championships in 1999 and 2000, respectively, and another strong interview today. It's being pre-recorded, so I'm recording this on a Monday in the early afternoon on what is a very splendid summer day here in mid-July in the lovely New Haven, Connecticut, where I reside. And you will hear this Friday at 6 p.m. in its usual time slot. So this will be airing later. And we have a heck of a guest for you today for this pre-recorded edition of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Before we get to that, just a brief word from Billy Ryan and the Ryan Investigative. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD Detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the archive, to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require. Contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike. All right, my next guest, well, who is he? He's a retired NYPD lieutenant commander, celebrated as, quote-unquote, the Godfather of Homicide, and the author of what many call the Bible of homicide investigations. With over 40 years in law enforcement, he led the Bronx Homicide Task Force, consulted on thousands of cases, and shaped forensic training globally. And that is Mr. Vernon Geberth. Did I say that correctly? I hope I did. I should have asked you that before. Is it Geberth?
Pretty close. It's Geberth.
Geberth. There we go.
Yeah.
Dock me 5 points for that. Vernon Geberth, a retired lieutenant commander out of the New York City.
It's a difficult name.
Yeah, it is. Who we welcome to the Mike the New Haven podcast. Lieutenant, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Yeah, I see some very important guests you've had in the past.
I've been
lucky.
I saw
Jack Cambria and I saw Ralph Friedman. Mm-hmm. We're in good company.
Thank you very much. We've been lucky on this program, I've often said, and very fortunate to be talking with you today. Before we cover anything regarding the New York City Police Department and your many years there, just tell me first where you grew up.
Well, I grew up on the suburbs of the Bronx called Mount Vernon, New York. Mm-hmm. Okay. And in my early life, I had a number of interesting jobs. I was a newspaper boy, and I loaded trucks. I was working from the time I was 12 years of age. I had a job. Okay. It's so important because every job you do, you develop a skill set. So as I grew older, I got more involved in other things like being a lifeguard. That was a fantastic job. I was an ambulance driver. I was a security guard, Boy Scout, VFW bugle boy. I mean, what's kind of interesting retrospectively? All these jobs I had, I was wearing a uniform. So I must have been destined to be in uniform, which I think is a very important calling. Prior to my entry into the New York City Police Department, I was a World's Fair police officer. And that was a great experience because everybody in that outfit that was teaching, instructing, and supervising were former NYPD officials. So I was getting an introduction into the NYPD before I entered. And all the forms were the same. Instead of UF for Uniform Force, it was WF for World's Fair. So I came in with a few skills that I picked up in the World's Fair Police Department.
Well, let me just ask you real quick, because that was something that was, and it's a product of a bygone era. It was held quite a bit annually, I believe, primarily in Queens over the years. So for those not familiar with it, what was the World's Fair? What was its significance and relevance to New York City?
Well, the World's Fair was in Queens, New York. It comprised a number of companies and countries from across the world. It was a great experience because you had a little flavor of each different country and their pavilions. Now, early on, I was like a regular police officer at the World's Fair. And before long, I planned my career around the NYPD, which is really funny. I left college to join the NYPD. I left in my junior year. I was in Iona College. And I'll never forget the brother who was kind of like the guidance counselor. In my junior year, he wanted to know what company I picked for my practicum. I said, brother, the NYPD. He goes, what? You're becoming a what? You went to Iona College to become a cop? I said, slow down, brother. You see that collar you got around your neck? That's your vocation? My vocation's the NYPD. And interesting, the only people who knew I was going into the police department was me and my girlfriend, and now the brother. So it looked like I was going to get appointed in December of 1964. So we planned everything around that. We planned to get married in October. I was working at the Wales Fair Police Department, had a good job. We went on our honeymoon. We come back from the honeymoon, and they tell me, you're laid off for the season. It's laid off. I've had a job since I was 12 years of age. What am I going to do? My wife says, calm down. We'll figure something out. I'm working. Well, it was a perfect time. It was around the Christmas season, and UPS was looking for drivers. So I volunteered. I went to Tuckahoe, New York. I was there every morning at 5:45 because you had to shape up at 6. Mm-hmm. Nobody picked me. Day 1, day 2. I'm getting depressed. On the third day, it must have been short. So some driver says, yeah, I've seen you hanging around. He says, you can work on my truck. And that was the beginning. By the time the season was over, I had my own truck, my own route. And I would deliver packages till midnight, until every package was off that truck, and then I'd come back to be back at 6 o'clock the next morning. Wow. So it was, but you know the best part about that, Mike? In January, they were laying people off because it's over the season. They held 5 people. I was one of the 5. And when they found out that I had 3 years of college, they sent me to management school down at 43rd Street in Manhattan. I'm not telling anybody I'm on the list. Anyway, come February, the World's Fair calls me up, and they tell me, come on back. We're going to make you a sergeant. A sergeant? I'm going to be a sergeant. We're going to put you in charge of liquor license inspections. I'm saying, liquor license inspection? What the hell is that? Well, they picked me because I was a dopey kid, and I wouldn't get lost in the bars. All right? I cruised through that pavilion, and I found out one thing. A lot of those pavilions had their own separate private bar and entertainment area for guests. So it was pretty interesting. And all of a sudden, April 30th, 1965, I get notified I'm going into the NYPD. And thus began my career.
You know, I had no idea in knowing about the World's Fair that they had their own police force, which I think is pretty cool and speaks to the significance and large scale of the event.
Well, it was interesting because we had police powers in the World's Fair. Mm-hmm. So we couldn't run around the city. Don't go out in the city, try to play cop. In the World's Fair, and we issue our firearms. We went to firearms training and everything else, but only on the grounds. Because it was the Pinkerton Corporation was the contract. Okay. And they kind of ran it with strict rules and procedures. But it was a great introduction to police work.
Absolutely, I'll say. And of course, kickstarted what would be one heck of a journey for you. As we're talking with retired NYPD Lieutenant Commander Vernon Geberth, widely regarded for his work specifically in homicide investigations here in the Mike the New Haven podcast. Again, a pre-recorded edition of the show that you will hear on Friday. So getting into 1965, I find that time period to be incredibly interesting for the city because it's a period of transition. The 50s and the 60s, for the most part, low crime, a peaceful time in New York City. We're starting to see a cultural shift, nationwide. Crime is starting to tick back up again. And this began what really was a multi-decade odyssey for the NYPD of high crime and a struggle to contain it. And it certainly kept you guys in homicide very, very busy. And getting there, and not too long after that, the TPF, Tactical Patrol Force, again, the byproduct of the bygone era. Tell me about the early days and tell me about your time at TPF, because I've had a few guys from your area around the show. The TPF was kind of the precursor, I feel, in some senses, to street crime.
Not really. The TPF was a unit that we'll never see it again. It was designed for crowd control and for inner city policing, high crime areas. And it was put together because, if you remember, in 1964, we had a very big riot in Harlem, and we were ill prepared for that. They formed this tactical patrol force actually in 1959. They picked 6'7" people, most of whom were Irish guys. Don't forget, I'm 5'8". But
so am I.
I had 3 years of college. And I aced my way through the police academy, both the physical and the academic. And more importantly, I had a couple of chances to show off because I was a lifeguard when we had lifeguard training. Okay. And one of the things that we had to do in the academy was to prepare a term paper, and everybody's squirming, go, term paper, term paper. I'm laughing. Term paper is no big deal for me. So I made the mistake of asking the lieutenant towards the end of the program, what do you want in this term paper, Lieutenant? Right? The rest of the class looks at me, you stupid ass. You talk about a term paper. I said, it's in the agenda. We have to do it. I just asked what we needed. So that was the same day we had to go for water safety. So we went down to the pool in the academy, and there was a black instructor. I never saw a man swim like that before, right? Across the pool, back and forth. I said, wow, look at this. So anyway, he said, all right, we're going to do some training with water safety, and I need a volunteer. So the three guys from my class, and Vick Geberth, they're mad at me about the term paper. I says, no problem. I tread water. He comes up behind me, he grabs me. We go into the water, right? I go into my lifeguard, take on my neck, bring him down, turn him around, get him up. He's tapping me. We come to the top. Where did you learn that? I said, I was a lifeguard, sir. Good. You're going to be my help, my instructor, my help, right? I says, good. Let's start with the three guys that volunteered me. And they made sure they got a mouthful of water. That'll teach you.
Exactly.
Anyway, I was selected for the TPF, and I was so proud of that when I came looking down the TPF numerals on your collar. And that was a big thing because those were the Green Berets of the police department.
Very much so.
And why I say that is because as soon as we graduated from the police academy, we went for more training. Riot control, building repelling, sniper rifles. It was constant training. And then when we weren't training, we were in different places, South Bronx, Harlem, Bedford-Stuyvesant, making arrests. And I had a hell of an arrest. I was an arrest machine, okay? Not the Mickey Mouse stuff, but the serious stuff. That which kept the crime down. Anyway, because of the TPF, don't forget, I'm a kid from the suburbs,
right,
from Mount Vernon. I don't know anybody. And because of TPF, the only legitimate unit they ever had in the New York City Police Department, I'm saying that loud and clear, the only legitimate unit, because you got promoted on merit and work. It wasn't who you knew, it was what you did. Within 3 years, I was a White Shield detective. That's a big deal. I was in the Bureau with a White Shield in 3 years. I owe all to TPF.
TPF, I guess, if not street crime, since you disagree with that, would it be more fair to say it was a precursor to what would eventually be the disorder control unit?
Well, TPF was the uniform detail. They had something that the Muggable Mary guys would dress up to get mugged, and we'd lost them. But the forerunner of street crime was actually the Taxi Truck Surveillance Unit, TTSU, mm-hmm. And I was selected for that. And as a detective in TTSU, I made some fantastic arrests. I got a few more commendations, but more importantly, that kind of set the tone because TTSU was a temporary assignment. Okay, but you had to go back to your regular command afterwards. But all of these things are skills, Mike. You're learning something from each unit. I can't impress people how important it is because everything I learned later on in homicide could go back to other assignments I had in the police department.
Absolutely. There's a direct correlation, as we'll discuss throughout this interview. And I want to go back to you being a White Shield detective at the time. So just for clarification, you were promoted or were you working in the detective squad on the road to getting your shield?
Well, I was on the road to get a gold shield, but you're a White Shield first. But I was officially in the detective division March 5th, 1968. You notice how I remember that? Because that was an important day. That was like 3 years later. Now, by June of 69, I got my gold shield. And at that time, I was in Bronx narcotics. And I had a very active career in Bronx narcotics. So a couple of shootings and a shotgun shootout. It's really hairy stuff. That summer in Bronx narcotics, I got 3 letters of commendation from the grand jury. That was unheard of. Recommended me to the police commission for recognition. And 2 of them were the shootings, and the other one was a bribery. Now, I didn't think much about it because, as far as I'm concerned, every time somebody gets locked up, they want to make a deal. Half of them are just trying to get out from under. I don't hold that against people. But when you're trying to pervert the system, when you want to bribe a cop to pervert the system, you need to get locked up. And I had this major violator from Harlem, the Bronx. He tried to pay us off with $1,000. He actually had the nerve to tell us, tell the judge you didn't find anything on a search warrant. So apparently he had been through this process before. So I said, well, I can't do anything here. We'll have to go back to the station house. I called up my captain, send him down, because we don't have tapes and stuff like that back in those days. All right. Looking through the one-way mirror as he pays basically the money, I said, you're under arrest for bribery. I didn't think much about it. But then later on, when the VAT commission came in, the SIU, SIC, and all the other ones came in, what happens is I get a subpoena to go to the State Investigation Commission. I'm going, wow, this is serious. I didn't do anything. So I call my partner up. Did you do anything? No. What's going on? You know what? You know what happened? We made the only arrest for bribery in the entire narcotics division in 1969. How do you like that?
And this is Serpico era.
Serpico, well, Serpico was around the same time. Yeah, maybe a little bit prior to that. I don't remember Serpico's. Same general time frame, 70s.
Yep. That's, again, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So listen, it was, you never know. In the meantime, I get dumped back into the Manhattan, into Harlem, because I had a complaint, right? And this captain was trying to get a piece of me. And I just said to him, you're not going to get a piece of me because I didn't do anything wrong, right? You know, went before the grand jury, had to testify before the grand jury, no true bill because we didn't do anything wrong. But before I got back to my command, he transferred me to Harlem. I said, okay, I can detect any place. I've been all over the city, Harlem, the Bronx, I don't care. Around the same time, I get into taxi truck surveillance unit. And that was great. That was citywide anti-crime, the forerunner. And I was making a lot of arrests. Meanwhile, I had taken the sergeant's test. And I had a very high mark on the sergeant's test. And we're following the chief is a newspaper in New York City that gives the civil service. Okay. It looks like I'm going to get promoted in December, which is perfect, right? And all of a sudden, that night, the teletype comes up with all the names. People are patting me on the back. Congratulations, Vernon, you made sergeant. My name's not on the list. Well, that captain purposely held me up because I had an active case pending in the department. Well, that hurt because we just had our third child. I could certainly use the extra money. Mm-hmm. But what am I going to do? I put my tail between my legs. I go back to the precinct, and that's the same year they have a police strike. But we don't strike because we're the detectives. So I'm in a radio call, answering calls as a patrolman because there's a strike. I they can't win. Well, it doesn't matter. When I did go to the trial room, that captain who's still looking to get me, right? He's there talking all this, right? Who shows up with the district attorney from the Bronx that had the case to testify on my behalf that this is a bogus charge? When the trial commissioner heard what he did to me, he chastised him in front of the whole group. What you did to this man, he's a hero. You took him, they tried to kill him, right? He went out. That was funny. I didn't get promoted till August that year, but I came back as a sergeant.
There you go. It worked out. At least it worked out in the long run. You know?
Well, hey, listen, when you're right, you're right. And just be true to yourself. Okay? Right. Don't let these people influence you.
No, you have to, and again, morals is a huge part of any aspect of first responder work. It doesn't matter how many years on the job you have. It doesn't matter how cynical you may get, depending on how many calls or cases you're dealing with. At the core, there's still good morals. Otherwise, why take the job? You're essentially out there doing God's work to keep the streets of New York City safe. And really anywhere that you're a police officer or a firefighter, it's God's work at the end of the day to keep those streets as safe as they can be. Now, I like asking this to those who moved up in rank. At that time, I mean, it doesn't matter what era of policing you're in. The common theme is this, especially as a brand spanking new sergeant, learning to lead, building the trust. You want the guys to know, hey, this guy's a worker. He's going to be getting his hands dirty with us. He's going to have our best interest at heart. And you got different personalities to manage, and different circumstances to manage with each person. What was your personal recipe based off supervisors you observed during your time on patrol and later on in the detective squad for getting the best out of people and building that good rapport that you need in order for a squad to be successful?
In order to be a good boss, you got to be a good cop. I wanted to be the kind of boss that I wanted to have when I was a cop. Okay, like certain people I work with, especially the captain back in the Bronx narcotics, when he told me, don't talk to that captain, he's out to get you. That's the kind of person you want, someone who's going to protect you and do the job with you. One of the highest compliments I ever got. Geberth's a tough guy, but he never told anybody to do what he didn't do himself. And that's important. So when I first got promoted to sergeant, I went to a precinct. Oh my God, I never worked in a precinct before. All this Mickey Mouse crap. And I'm used to being a crime fighter. I'm used to taking action. Well, I didn't last there but 3 weeks. That inspector couldn't wait to get rid of me. I drove him nuts. You want to go back to TPF? I said, yes, sir. I went back to TPF as a squad sergeant. Now I'm like a pig. This is wonderful. I'm back where I belong. I got squads of people. I know the operation, and I got good people working with me, and they're looking to get promoted too. So it's a nice operation. I was back in TPF as a sergeant for about a year when I got picked up for a heavy-duty investigation involving organized crime. And this was one of the most complex, super secret investigations I had ever been exposed to. 26 wiretaps, 3 bugs on the 5 crime families of New York. You have never been exposed to anything like this. You listen to these bugs, it's like listening to The Sopranos. They're bragging about jobs they did, and we're getting the information. Also, during that case, certain officials' names came up, police officials, politicians, but no one got touched because no one was supposed to know about this super secret investigation. Sadly, I missed the lieutenant's test because I was so busy doing police work, right? But I got promoted to detective sergeant out of Operation Uncover, and now I had lieutenant's money. But, that's okay because I'm doing what I like to do. Then I got involved in another heavy-duty investigation. It was another one. So all of these things come into play later on. They're using the wiretaps, using informants, getting secret information. These all come into play. So when you finally get the homicide, you have a wealth of skills that you can now bring to the homicide investigation. The trouble was I couldn't get out of OCCB, the narcotics. They wouldn't let me go. So
I can see why.
What happened? Well, what happens? No, what happened? We had another heavy-duty case that I started on the mafia, and as a result, it was called Occupation Octopus because there was so many tentacles, counterfeit money, tokens, robberies. Oh, it was just nonstop. I had this new lieutenant, from headquarters, never was in the street. Remember Heartbreak Ridge with Clint Eastwood? That movie, Heartbreak Ridge. Do you remember that silly Major Malcolm Powers from Supply? Well, that's what this guy was.
Yes, I do.
Malcolm Powers from Supply. I don't want to bore you with details, except that
please, you're not boring me. Go right ahead.
Everything he touched, he screwed up. He even lost money on a buy operation. But towards the end, we're locking people up. And these 3 wise guys that we have them for counterfeit money, stolen trucks, and that. They start talking to me in mob talk. You got to understand the language. Right? Me and 2 detectives start talking back in mob talk. They said, listen, $3,000, take that counterfeit money off the table. I said, okay, but I can't talk to lieutenants yet. Meanwhile, I go out, notify internal affairs, get wired up. I come back, and the lieutenant is talking to detectives. He goes, there will be no bribery unless I participate. That's how he talks. You can't talk like that. I said, I just cut you out. So now we go into the room. He cuts the detectives out so he can be there, right? Mm-hmm. Everything's going fine until he says, what kind of nefarious deal are you talking about? These 2 mob guys, their eyes open up. I said, shut the hell up, you stupid bastard.
Well, there goes that.
Well, no, that's what I'm getting at. There's a lot behind the story. So he disappears. Mm-hmm. We got stolen trucks. We got money. Where the hell did he go? He went back to headquarters to write himself up. He heard something about a bribery review board that he could get brownie points. I never heard of such a thing. I could care less. I'm doing police work. So I come back to the command after hours worth of work with my detective. He goes, where were you, Sergeant? I say, doing police work, you dopey bastard. I say, you have to sign this report. I says, what report is that? The bribery review board. So he's never heard of it. So just sign it. So I look, where's the detective's names? Were they present for the bribe? No, you cut them out. I said, no problem. What goes around comes around. I get called down about a month or 2 later in the middle of another major case. And the inspector from Internal Affairs says, congratulations, Sergeant, on your integrity. I says, listen, Inspector, I've been doing this my entire life. That report you got there is bogus. What? That's bogus. I said, that's not how it went down. He caught 2 detectives. They should be down here getting recognition, not me. I don't need it. So I tell him what happened. The following day, the lieutenant's got to go down. He goes back red in the face. What did you tell the inspector? The truth. Told him the truth.
Exactly.
I said, don't screw with me because I'll call him up. That's how I got on the narcotics into homicide.
What a charmed existence. But again, it was charmed because you were actually doing the work. And those are the type of bosses that need to be rewarded in any police agency you go to, because unfortunately, some bosses, and not all, majority of your bosses are good bosses, but you have some that can be morale killers. It sounded like this guy was one heck of a morale killer.
Yeah. Well, getting to homicide was my desire. Now, the problem is I've been in narcotics for 5 years. Am I going to walk into this operation and start telling people with 20 and 30 years how to do the job when they already know how to do the job? No, of course not. It's up to me to learn what they do so I can properly supervise it. So at this stage in my career, I know a lot of people. Don't forget, I was a cop, I was a detective, I was a detective sergeant. I've been all over the city. You know, there's 3 types of cops in this business. The very, very good cops, the mediocre cops, and the screwed up cops. Now, we don't tell the general population about the screwed ups, but you want to know how you find out who they are? Bring everybody into the room. Okay, men, women, pick yourself a partner. The asshole that's left over is the screw up.
It's kind of, it's kind of like the kid that never gets picked for volleyball, or when you're putting together a team for basketball or 5-on-5, he's the one that doesn't get picked or gets picked last. So I can,
it's the same concept, Mike.
Right. It really is. The older you get, the more you go across life, the more you realize how true it is. And it never really stops, no matter the profession. Before I continue into homicide, though, I did want to go back to those mob investigations, because unfortunately, during this time period, they've ran the city. Corruption was rampant. They were involved in everything. And we're not just talking one family. Like you said, this investigation centered on all 5 of them. They're getting particularly into drug trafficking. The name I think of, because he was so prolific with it, was Carmine Galante. Carmine Galante, right up until the moment he got shot dead at Joe and Mary's restaurant in 79, the anniversary of it just passed, was one of the more prolific heroin traffickers in the world. So dealing with these guys, or at the very minimum, monitoring these guys as you were, who in addition to their involvement in drug trafficking are involved in murder primarily, you must have been itching to bust them, because you have them 6 ways to Sunday, but it took forever to bring them down.
Well, you have to build the case. And the case has to be prosecutable. So just having the information is not sufficient. You need to corroborate that with evidence and facts. Most of our mob homicides are solved because they can't keep their mouth shut when they're talking. Because they're talking about, some of the cases that we have, and go back into the annals of the NYPD. A lot of the homicides are solved after the fact when we picked them up on wires, because they're always involved in some aspect of crime. Like, I know this has nothing to do with what we're talking about exactly, but one of my more exciting exploits was a running shootout through the streets of Little Italy with a mob on a diamond heist. I was off duty, because in those days, when you went to court, if you were a detective, you didn't get paid.
Right.
So I'm down in Manhattan. I'm stuck at Canal Street in Mulberry at the right light. I look out the side window and I see 2 guys grabbing somebody off the street and throwing them in the car. So considering where I am, I says, "Jesus, it looks like a hit. I can't let this go down." So I start blowing the horn for the traffic cop. He's too busy directing traffic. You don't want to know nothing. All I'm doing is attracting myself. Next thing you know, I'm in pursuit. Now, I just so happen to have a siren in my car. It's a burglar alarm, but it can be used as a siren. So I activate the siren, and now we're racing through the streets, and I fire a shot in the air, and I point like I'm shooting at them, right? And they slow down. I come up alongside. I show my shield. Pull over. Next thing you know, they make a U-turn. Now we're going the wrong way, 50 miles an hour down the one-way street, and we got a chase and a half going. I'm going, Jesus, Vernon, what the hell are you doing? You already got passed by the sergeant. Now you're firing shots. You're in a chase. You don't even know what the hell you're doing. It's too late. The adrenaline kicked in. Got to save the man. I got to save him. I end up pull in the car. I jam them up onto Kenmore Street. They pull up on the sidewalk. Guy jumps out of the car. He's got a gun in his belt. He's going for it. I shoot him. He goes down. I lose peripheral vision. I can't see what's going on to the right-hand side. But on the left-hand side, I see this big guy running down the street. As he's too big to fight, I'm going to shoot him. I go to shoot, and a woman with a baby carriage comes out. I go, holy shit. I run, and I do a running tackle. Mike, I'm telling you, I was on super speed. I do a tackle. Next thing I hear, don't move, you others, right? You know where I was? I was behind police headquarters. I didn't even realize the people who told me not to move, you effers, were cops. I said, I'm detected. He's under arrest. By this time, we got sirens. Everybody's responding. We said, oh, man, you're not going to get promoted. I go back to the car, and I see this guy cleaning himself off. I says, what happened to you? He says, my diamonds. Did you get my diamonds? It's $100,000 worth of diamonds. This was a mafia-sanctioned hit. So I saved the day. So now we go to yeah, but I saved the day, but now I'm in all kinds of trouble. We go back to where, because now they want to see who I shot. He's not there. Later on, we find out he was picked up and brought into a social club. Probably see a mob doctor. There's a plate glass window where I shot him. There's no hole, so if I know I got him, right? Mm-hmm. We go to court, and now the fun starts. The complainant is getting calls at home from the mob. Drop the charges, drop the charges. So I tell the district attorney, I said, listen, he's being threatened. This guy's a member of the Gambino crime family. He says, no problem. His lawyer's a mob lawyer. I'll talk to him. Basically tells the mob lawyer, stop this shit or there's no bail. So next day, all the newspapers, I'm a hero, right? You think I would get like the Medal of Valor for this? No. You have open charges. We'll give you a commendation. I said, Medal of Valor out the window. I'm still being beat up. I don't think much about it until about 6 months later, I get a subpoena from the Records Bureau. I'm under investigation. They think I threw the case. I said, I didn't throw the case. I've been in touch with the complaint. We never got notified. They look, they go, oh, that judge is a mob judge. The mob judge ordered a hearing without telling the district attorney's office and dismissed the charge because we didn't show up. Now he's got to get re-indicted. I go before the grand jury again. And after this, I get a nice letter from Frank Hogan, how what a good guy I am and all this stuff. I still didn't get no medal. I got a commendation. I should have got the Medal of Valor. Now let's fast forward because we talked what you talked about with the wire. It's now 6 years later. I'm in Bronx homicide. I get a call from a friend of mine in the intelligence division. He says, Vernon, remember that car chase you were in back in 1971? I says, yeah. You know who you were chasing? I says, no. John Gotti. John Gotti was in that car.
Oh, my God. Who later became the Teflon Don after he assassinated Paul Castellano, of which the 40th anniversary of that murder, along with Tommy Pilati, of course, is coming up in December. And who would have thought? I mean, he was getting until, of course, everything caved in on him in 1992 when he was finally convicted. He was, no wonder they called him Teflon. How would he should have been under the jail then?
Well, I didn't know who it was because he was a nobody at that time.
Right, at that time,
1971.
Yeah, I don't even think he was a capo yet.
But 6 years later, everybody knew who he was.
And after the Castellano hit, everybody definitely knew who he was. We're talking with Vernon Geberth here on the Mike the New Haven podcast, and man, full of stories. We haven't even dived into homicide yet, and we're a half hour into this pre-recorded edition of the program, which when you hear this, it will be airing on July 25th, Friday. Getting into homicide, I've talked about this before with different homicide investigators, and again, this transcends whatever era you're working in homicide. Rather times are peaceful in the city, relatively speaking, or rather times they're not, and the homicide rate is high. Every victim has a story. Every victim has somebody who loves them. Doesn't matter if they were a person of good standing in society or like these gangsters who are living violent lives. At one point, they were a baby in their mother's arms. So you owe them something, and you can speak for them because they can no longer speak for themselves. When it came to even the quote-unquote public service homicides where criminals are killing other criminals, tell me about because every person's different, your personal investigative steps and some of the more challenging but ultimately rewarding cases that you and your squads were able to solve.
Well, I learned from the best. As I mentioned, I wasn't going to come in there and start telling people what to do. It was that learning process that became the nucleus of my textbook, because I couldn't possibly replicate 20 and 30 years worth of experience in a short amount of time. So what I did is I took notes. I had my own protocol, my own checklist. And when I saw something good, I wrote it down. When we solved the case, right, something, we shared it. Every day I was off. On my days off, I would go to the library. They didn't have Google back in those days. Right? They had index cards. I would go through the index cards. I read everything on homicide there was. There wasn't one book written by a cop, maybe one 30 years earlier, but all the rest were written by academics. I said, "Now this is not what we need." But there's a wealth of information if you pull it out. Then I'd go back to the command and I'd look at the cases. Then I'd find out what we used in what case, what we could use in another. And I began to introduce forensics. And I said, we need more than a confession. I want evidence. And that was the beginning. So those notes that I made for myself and my checklist became the nucleus of practical homicide investigation. Now, the next thing that happened, I had already gotten one master's degree when I was in narcotics. And using that master's degree, I did a study of the young Black entrepreneurs that were dealing drugs called the quarter kids. They didn't use drugs. They became junior superflies. They were brought into the operation by the older Black major violators because they wouldn't go to jail because they were youths. But they were smart youths. They weren't going to use drugs. They saw the ability to entrepreneur this. And I did a sociological study, and it was published. It's called The Quarter Kids. In my Godfather book, it's chapter 17. It talks about how they operated. But that same methodology that I used to do that, I am going to now bring it into homicide. I'm going to research my own job. Now, part of that is doing study, doing work. I made appointments with all the ologists in the city. The serologists, the forensic pathologists, the anthropologists, the entomologists, psychologists, all the ologists, and I asked for their papers. Then I took their papers and read what they wrote, and I wrote it back in copies. And I brought it back to them. Is this basically what you do? Yeah, but you make it look too easy. We're not trying to do it. I just want to know how we can apply it. And that became I even brought an entomologist to one of my crime scenes to collect bugs. I'm just always thinking outside the box. And these things became instrumental in my homicide work. Now, in the meantime, I was writing articles for Law and Order magazine because I used to publish. And Law and Order magazine, people were saying, get that guy, that detective sergeant from New York, have him write another article. These are good. The FBI National Academy picked me up to go to their National Academy, which is a training program. Why? Because they want to tap into my head and find out what I know. I took everything they had on investigations, homicide. Trust me, they knew nothing about homicide. They knew about forensics and management. And every time they showed a case, it was somebody else's case with their name on it. And when I would ask them a question, can't answer that question because that's confidential information. No, you can't answer because you don't know what you're talking about. No procs. Right? Anyway, they tried to hire me. The FBI tried to hire me as a homicide instructor. I said, no. I'm an NYPD cop. I'm going to go back. In the meantime, I had been putting together this manuscript. And I told my wife, I says, I think I'm going to be able to publish a textbook now that I've seen what they got out there. Because I had a master's degree, I was allowed to make an application to teach college. I taught college for 2 semesters. I kept missing class because in the Bronx, we had too many homicides. In the 7th homicide, we had 125 homicides a year within a 6.5 square mile area. That's murder mayhem.
Yeah, okay. That's murder capital. That's what that is.
Yeah, but that's how you learn. That's where you're going to learn. And you said public service homicides. Well, yeah, there's misdemeanor murders when 2 drug killers kill each other, but there's still a family behind them. Exactly. Okay, that's what you're looking for. Yeah, and so, I designed another protocol for drug-related homicides. Now, when I got back from the FBI Academy, now the FBI is not hiring me, but asking me to do training for them for local police. That's when I get involved with the homicide school in New York City. I said, well, New York City comes first. That's where I learned this stuff. My first time at the New York City Police Homicide School, 2-week school, I got 1 hour. All right. I walked in front of the group. I got 200 hardcore NYPD detectives looking at me like, who the hell are you to teach me? Well, like they say in the Bible, there's no such thing as a local prophet. Okay, you got to go someplace else. I said, I'm not here to teach you anything. I'm here to show you what I got. And by the time I finished, I had 4 hours, and I taught that school for 29 years, even after I retired, because I believe in giving back. Because if it wasn't for the NYPD, I wouldn't be who I am today. So,
that's so true. The job is given. Even guys that talk about how they miss the clowns, but not the circus necessarily when they retire. They talk glowingly about the things they've been able to accomplish in the private sector because of the New York City Police Department. It doesn't matter what side of the first responder coin you're on. The colleagues, if you got great ones, if you're blessed to have great ones, they're the ones that make the job. That's what makes the job so much fun. It's the people you work with get the best out of you. You get the best out of them. Now, you were talking about, of course, the homicides back then and learning from the best and being able to go in there. FBI is interesting because, like you said, their specialty, at least back then, wasn't homicide. I think of the FBI in terms of undercover work, long-term investigations into terrorism. They're very good at building their cases. But as far as dealing with homicides, they always operate, unless it's a high-profile figure, like a political figure, for example, on the basis that, okay, let's just hand this off to the local police. And in a city like New York, the NYPD is more than adept, has more than enough personnel to be able to handle it. Well, what you talked about walking into a room of 200 hardened detectives looking at you like, okay, what does he have? What was it like trying to talk to federal agents?
Well, let me tell you something. If you can survive that group, you can survive anything. But I proved myself. As soon as they found out I wasn't trying to talk down to them, what I was doing, sharing. Now, later on, don't forget, I'm learning as I'm going along. I'm also teaching outside the city. And I'm learning from outside the city as well how they do things. And I'll never forget, I went down to Delaware. I used to teach in the University of Delaware twice a year. Delaware, the DuPont Corporation is a big corporation. All those officers had their own computers in the car, right? We weren't even near computers. If we had computers in New York City back in 1980, they were used for management. There was no crime data in there. All right. So I'm picking. And I'm seeing different cases. So what I would do is I'd bring the cases back and I'd show them to the New York detectives. Look, what about this? What about this? And I had those famous "We Work for God" signs. I have distributed 90,000 of these things across the world. It's a nice, it's a nice message. I'm not making anybody go to church. Just remember who you're working for. Okay. And it was amazing because people would open up to me. And I always acknowledge other people's work. If you looked at my textbook, Practical Homicide Investigation, my Practical Homicide Investigation takes 2 hands to carry it. That's how big it is. All right. This is the Bible. The first 14 pages are acknowledgments of people across the world who helped contribute something to that book. And as a result of those things, acknowledgments, it's so simple. Acknowledge other people. Don't just acknowledge yourself. As a result, I was invited into some of the biggest cases across the country. Some of the major serial murder cases. You'd see me on television. I'd be talking about it. Why? Because I was involved behind the scenes. Never took credit for anything. Credit belongs to them. But I had the cases. And when it came time to revise, I had new material. And one year I was revising, and I'm saying, wow, this sexual-related homicide stuff is getting off the wall. What's going on? It's called the internet. That's what's going on. People being influenced by the internet. Right. I had to do what I was going to do. I was going to revise my book. I had a whole separate book on sexual-related homicide and death investigations, practical and clinical perspectives, because I was able to bring the clinical into that based on my second master's degree in clinical psychology. So I'm always learning, and and as a result, there's some horrific cases that have taken place across the country. BTK, I was part of that. The New Mexico slave torturer, Maury Travis, St. Louis, Richard Cunningham. I mean, all these cases I had a piece of. So
I'm thinking of the Preppy murder as well, too. That had played a role allegedly in that trial.
Which murder?
The Preppy murder of 1986.
Yeah, the Preppy murder got a lot of publicity because it was in Manhattan and Central Park. Yeah. But I tell you, there's a lot more worse cases than that. All right. And that's the problem. If you take a case like, I'll give you an example. Maury Travis, black serial killer, St. Louis, killed 22 women, most of them prostitutes who wouldn't be missed. Do you know there was no publicity in that case at all? Nothing.
Shocking.
Well,
you would think, and you.
Well, no, I was shocked because those are victims. All right,
Right.
There's a pattern here. Very clever perpetrator, but he was being influenced with his own sexual desires. So he started recording things on videotape, and then one day he decides, I've killed more people than the son of Sam. Why don't I get publicity? So he downloads a map from Media Expedient, right? And he sends it to a reporter from the St. Louis Dispatch. Hey, if you write another nice story, I'll give you another body. Well, bingo, his IPO shows up. And that's how he was identified. Now, the detective who had that case was one of my students, which is thrilling when one of my students is involved in something. He shares everything with me. All the information with Maury Travers, the videotapes, what he was doing. Again, that's information that should be shared among law enforcement. So these are the kind of cases I would get involved with.
And had he never said that, we would never know who this probably. I mean, maybe it would have been solved eventually with the advances we've made technologically, but there's a good shot we would never know who this guy was.
Yeah, because what he was doing was dropping him in different jurisdictions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you would, again, and this is not Ted Bundy. This is not Son of Sam. So it's not playing out on a national stage. And I'm thinking, too, I mean, even Aaron Key in the late 90s. That was another. I had the detective who worked that case on a while ago. He's a good friend of mine, Scott Wagner, who uses your line often, in referring to the homicide squad as we work for God Squad. Same thing. Aaron Key did not get nearly the same amount of attention. This was a guy who preyed on women in Harlem in the early to mid 90s, sexually assaulted them, murdered them, put them in shopping carts at the end of it. So, but again, I think it's important to remember it's not, and again, you've highlighted this thoroughly, and every detective feels this way, that is worth their weight. It's not about the publicity. It's just about doing the right thing. Doesn't matter if it's on listen, if you can get more attention on it, then it puts the pressure on the killer, sure. But at the end of the day, if you are worth your weight as an investigator, you're going to find your man or your woman that's responsible for this. And that ultimately is the main objective.
That was the message. That was my message. There's a thing that I talk about in Practical Homicide. And one of the things I would share with everybody would be the oath of practical homicide investigation. If I may, I'll read it.
Sure, please do.
Homicide investigation is a profound duty. As an officer entrusted with such a duty, it is incumbent upon you to develop an understanding of the dynamics and principles of professional homicide investigation. Practical homicide investigation suggests that things be done right the first time and that knowledge is power. Knowledge which has been enhanced with experience, flexibility, and common sense. Practitioners must be prepared to use tactics, procedures, and forensic techniques in their pursuit of the truth, then follow the course of events and the facts as they develop to their ultimate conclusion. Death investigation constitutes a heavy responsibility, and as such, let no person deter you from the truth and your own personal commitment to see that justice is done, not only for the deceased, but for the surviving family as well. And remember, we work for God. And that is in all of my textbooks, and everybody in the homicide school that I taught would get a copy of that to take. And many of those hang in detective squads across the city.
And it's so true, and it's never changed, again, no matter what era we're in. And I want to center on your teaching exploits in a moment, but this is something I wanted to ask you as well. And if you didn't work them, you didn't work them. But if so, if you're comfortable, I want to dive into it. The police killings, when police officers are shot and killed in the line of duty, it doesn't matter if you knew the officer or not. It's personal. It's one of yours. Did you ever have a hand in investigating the murders of police officers in New York City?
Absolutely. Don't forget, I was there during the Black Liberation Army, the Black Panthers.
Yeah.
We had 9 cops assassinated in 1971. Nobody remembers that. I remember them all. And what's so disturbing is that the high command was trying to deny anything was wrong. Okay, it wasn't politically advantageous to admit that we had a group of insurrectionists killing cops. Okay, and there's some bad stuff that was done, and I don't want to name names or embarrass police officials, but they're responsible because they didn't allow us to take action. At one point, we had to bring our own weapons to work because all we had was those pea shooters. It wasn't until Bratton became the police commissioner in transit first that he gave the officers automatic weapons. I'll never forget that kid in Brooklyn who had a 6-shooter, and he was trying to reload with his goofy speed loader. The guy comes up to him and executes him with a semi-automatic.
Scott Goodell, 1986.
Yes,
his anniversary just passed. Yeah, and it took even then. Scott gets murdered during a shootout. For those of you that don't know, responding, I forget, it may have been man with the gun, but a shootout ensues. Scott's behind a car, and to your point, Lieutenant, he's reloading his weapon or trying to. Some animal comes up behind him and shoots him point blank in the head. That was 1986. The automatic weapons didn't come till 1994 when Bratton became police commissioner. Even with that tragedy, it still took another decade almost for that change to happen. So, listen, unfortunately, a lot of the policies that exist in the New York City Police Department are written in the blood of fallen officers. And that was one such case, and I'm not going to ask you which one bothers you because they all bother you. They all
bother. Of course, they all bother. But
you
know what bothers me is when we're dealing with incompetence and political expediency. Okay, perfect example: Larry Davis, the Larry Davis case.
Yeah,
I gave up my command to get him captured. He shot 6 cops. Those cops never should have been shot. Why were they shot? Because they didn't follow a protocol. I had a fugitive unit in Bronx Narcotics. We apprehended people a hell of a lot more dangerous than Larry Davis without incident, without a shot being fired. But my fat chief in the Bronx, Rotundo, I call him, okay? He wouldn't allow my fugitive unit to take it. We don't need elitists in the Bronx, Vernon. I said, well, I think you're making a mistake, Chief, because every time you locate them, you have to put together a scramble of ESUs and whoever's available. That's not a smart move. That's how people get hurt. And on November 19th, 1986, 6 cops were shot. They almost died. Ironically, the hospital was across the street, Bronx, Lebanon.
Yeah.
But Mike, that's the kind of hospital. If your partner brings you there, if you get out, you kill your partner.
Yeah, I heard. I've heard.
All right. So
yeah,
what happened is they put together this very stupid, convoluted apprehension that was politically correct. Okay. And detectives are not allowed in the street. No detectives in the street by orders of the police commissioner. I said, that's interesting because that's the same police commissioner that released 17X at the Harlem Mosque. Okay. So I got a good memory of a murder cop. My chief comes in. I come in from home because I was off duty.
Right.
I'm here to babysit you, Geberth. I said, good. 5:30, he took his phone. At 5:35, I was on the street with 12 hand-picked detectives. We missed Larry Davis by an hour at Webster Avenue. The next day, Alpha Bravo tours, 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And they had this goofy apprehension where detectives cannot go in the street. They should detect. I said, well, what does that mean? Well, burn informants. Okay. Every time he was located, we were supposed to notify command and control, and then they send a convoy out with ESU, task force, community representatives. It has to be led by a super chief. At the time we had, we're the only department arrogant enough to have the rank of super chief. 5 super chiefs. The chief had to be called Patton. The next guy was Costa. Next guy was Holzgar. Next guy was Minips. Next guy was Bradley. And they had army helmets with stars. And the trucks could not move unless there was a super chief. I'm watching this shit go on for 3 weeks. We're burning informants left and right. It was horrible. At one point, the FBI calls up. We have an informant that says Larry Davis is hiding in Harlem. This is great. The FBI figured black people live in Harlem. It turned out to be a bogus thing. The informant takes $5,000 of your tax dollars. He says, if I take my hat off, he's on the 17th floor. So he walks in, takes his hat off, goes out the back door with the $5,000. They hit the apartment, scare the shit out of her grandma. Meanwhile, we have information in the Bronx. He's at a certain location, but we can't go because the trucks are tied up in Harlem. At one point, somebody from the news media that respected me and I respected him, Vernon, what the hell's going on in the Bronx? I said, well, we should be striking like lightning. Instead, we move like a large blue elephant. Somebody downtown figured I said that. Vernon, you better watch it.
And that, listen, that case is personal for me because one of the cops that was shot was Rick Martinez from Truck 3 Emergency Service.
That's right. And the Emergency Service Unit.
Yep. Rick's a friend of mine.
And one of my top detectives was shot through the neck.
Yeah.
Tommy McCarran.
Yep.
Okay, so listen to this. On December 5th, 1986, I get a call from one of my detectives. We have Larry on the wire. He's at his sister's house on Webster Avenue. I said, do not notify command and control. You have notified me. At that point, Mike, I was insubordinate. The deputy inspector who was detailed to watch me said, Vernon, I'm out of here. In other words, if you're going to commit suicide, I don't want to watch. I ordered 38 black and Hispanic undercover officers into that building to seal it. If they want to go out, they can't go out. They want to come home, they can't come home. When you have that building sealed, we'll bring the white faces in. I put the trucks on notice 5 blocks away. I go to the location on portable radio talking to my people. Meanwhile, the radio's going crazy trying to find out where I am. Suddenly I tell them, okay, move the trucks forthwith, we have them. It took 15 minutes for those trucks to go 5 blocks. Why? Because it was Custer's turn to lead the parade that day, and he's stuck in traffic in Manhattan. When the trucks pull up to the building with the air brakes, everybody looks out the window, right? Including Larry Davis. He can't get out. He can only go up. The chief comes running out with his Beetle Bailey helmet. By whose authority have you done this? I said, by the authority vested in me in common sense. By the way, Chief, you look like a freaking asshole with that hat. He turns around to see if anybody heard me say it. I run in the building. I don't know where to go. Didn't take them long to get me. They bring me downstairs to the basement, housing police office. Now the 3 chiefs are screaming at me. The chief, the second chief, and my chief. There was a housing lieutenant watching this go down. He told me later on, he said, Vernon, it was the funniest thing I ever saw. The chiefs are screaming and yelling at you, and you're just going, you finished? Are you finished? And the one chief was a very sardonic personality, very sardonic. He would call his chiefs and inspectors captain to scare them because that was their last civil service rank. Mm-hmm. So he says to me, Vernon, are you a lieutenant commander or a lieutenant? The difference is captain's money. I says, whatever the hell you want, Chief. My people have them in the building. They're not your people. They're my people. I said, then your people have them in the building. Go back and forth. The other guy, why did you do this, Geberth? I says, because I want to get in court this time. We look like a laughing stock across the country. Then my guy, you were insubordinate, Geberth. I says, no, I improvised, adapted, and overcame. The flogging stopped when they heard him on the wire. He's telling his family, tell the cops that I got away. Tell them I'm someplace else. Now, we know he's in the building someplace. Finally got him. You know, the guy that we couldn't catch for 3 weeks, he's holding hostages on the 14th floor. He sends somebody out he sends somebody out to get Chinese food. This is the guy we couldn't catch. It's horrendous. You know what was really disgusting, Mike? As he walks out with the police commissioner and the chief and my detective, Andy Lugo, God rest his soul, he's no longer with us, first grade detective, walking him through a phalanx of police officers and the crowd yelling, Larry, like he's a village hero. He was a thug. He's killing people.
Yeah, he that's what he was wanted for, to give the audience context. Most of you in the audience know this, some of you don't. Larry Davis was killing drug dealers. He was a really, really violent guy, and that's what he was wanted for. That's what they got arrested for that night when he shot the 6 cops, including my friend Rick. And when he was arrested, he pees his pants, I believe. And it's also personal for me. So because of the pipe bomb, the bomb squad comes out. Don Sadawi, who is of 1993 World Trade Center bombing fame, he found the VIN number attached to the van that the bombers utilized and broke that case. He's telling the guys, Larry's coming out crying, same hardened thug that shot 6 cops and was responsible for the murder of several other drug dealers that he had dealt with. He's telling them, be a man, be a man. You know, so the guy couldn't even be a man when he was arrested. He was later stabbed to death in prison, ironically. Didn't die on the street, died in prison, was stabbed several times by an inmate, which goes to show, as my mother always told me when I was little, there's always someone bigger, there's always someone tougher, there's always someone badder. Larry Davis found that out, and he ain't missed.
In his case, we had 6 homicides on him, a quadruple in the Bronx, 2 in Manhattan. All right. He was not found guilty because Kunstler and Lynn Stewart, the 2 radical attorneys, made it look like the cops were on the take. The jury didn't find him guilty of homicide. They found him guilty of gun possession. And apparently, when he was in custody in the Department of the Corrections, he was a pain in the ass for them too. He ends up getting killed in prison. So you live by the sword, you die by the shiv. Mm-hmm. And when someone called me up and asked me about it, I says, looks like the Department of Corrections did what the criminal justice system couldn't do. He's not going to kill anybody anymore. But anyway, that's the day I committed commandercide. You know, I had to leave after that. You don't get to stay as commander of Bronx Homicide doing what I did.
No, but it's, listen, you went out with the respect of your men and women working under you, and that's all that matters. And there's a lot of bosses, unfortunately, that've had to pay that price unnecessarily. And the department, the bigger the agency, the more the politics in play. You saw it during that investigation. I've talked about that with Don Sadawi. I talked about that with Rick when he was on, and a few other friends of mine who were in emergency at the time. And it was a disaster. And, the Bronx has always had the reputation, unfortunately, with police killings or incidents like this where thankfully, miraculously, no officers were killed, where the prosecution, at least back then, I don't know how it is now, leaves a lot to be desired. Another case, Vinny Giudice in 1996, wasn't shot, had his leg cut on a domestic dispute, bled. They wanted a murder charge and ended up getting reduced to manslaughter. So, it's always hit and miss with things like that. Now, diving into the teaching aspect of your career, it's one thing to teach your cops locally. To want to take it countrywide or worldwide is a bit of a different story. It takes ambition because it is a lot of work. What made you want to go nationwide? And ultimately, what were the things that you learned early on about other countries, about other investigators, that even with the similarities in terms of methods, you found most interesting in terms of, I guess, for lack of a better way to word it, differences in customs with each police agency you went and spoke with?
Well, I learned, when you're teaching, if you're a smart teacher, you're also asking questions and you're getting feedback. And I will be learning as I'm teaching. A lot of people wanted to share what they had, to tell them how they did something. Or one of the things I got to be honest. Every time I showed a case, I put the name of the agency up and the main detectives involved, so people could see that Vernon Geberth wasn't doing this; somebody else was doing this. That came back 100-fold to me because I have a passion for this. I have a passion for the profession. I believe that we work for God. I believe we're on a mission, and thank God for my belief in God and the way I feel. I have seen the unseeable. I have seen the worst of mankind against mankind. And I kind of cloak myself in the armor of God, okay, knowing that I'm exposing myself to evil. If you get too close to evil, evil gets into you, okay? And that has been able to, I go to church every Sunday and every religious holiday. I believe in that. I pray, okay? Because you got to protect yourself from this stuff because you're looking at it, and when you're analyzing it, you're absorbing it. Now, I try to clinicize a lot of this stuff. It's nice to be able to say, well, from a clinical perspective, yeah, but we're still seeing it, okay? And that's what's kept me going all this time. And I've been blessed with the associations I've made across the country and the cases I've had. And that's what my contribution is. My textbooks will be here long after I leave. And the only reason I did the Godfather book, the Godfather Homicide, this is a legacy book. This is for my grandkids. Hey, this is what Grandpa did. How did I get to be who I got to be? You got to pay your dues. And a lot of people don't want to put the extra time in. When I first started out, Michael, I wanted to be the best homicide detective in the world. There's no such thing. You know why? It's a teamwork effort. Everybody brings a different aspect into the case. I look back over the years with the different people I've worked with. I had one guy in Bronx Homicide, South Bronx. I don't know how he got on the test, on the police department. This guy was illiterate. But you want to know something? Was worth his weight in gold in the street. You put him in the street, and he was like a truth machine. So I hooked him up with a writer. We need somebody who can put down what you did, okay? Because you can't say that. It was unbelievable. But it's just matching the personalities to the job. That's so important.
Oh, of course. And again, you understood that as a commander to boot. We're talking with Vernon Geberth, a retired lieutenant commander out of the NYPD, who, of course, wrote the Bible on homicide and is regarded as the godfather of homicide investigations, owing to his many years investigating them in New York City. Now, as far as technological advancements, we saw this in the 90s, 80s and 90s. DNA is being used now. We got facial recognition patterns starting to come into play, which is really helping things. It's helping not just in New York City, but across the nation, later on across the world. When that came into play, from someone of your era, you got your gold shield in 1969, you've been investigating homicides, at that point, multiple decades. How much did that age your work, and how tricky was it as someone that had a set method by that point of incorporating that into your teaching?
Very important, because it requires you to learn. Don't forget, I had the first DNA case in New York State. All right. The third one in the country. I was always looking for new information. I had a microbiologist, Dr. Robert Shaler, who kept telling me, Vernon, there's something really good coming, something really good to help us called DNA. I said, what does it mean? He goes, do not ask. Do not ask. During my time in homicide, all we had was the ABO system, the blood types. ABO gave you 1 in 3 in the population. In the early 1980s, serologists developed PGM subtypes, which were protein markers, gave you 1 in 10 in the population. The 1 in 10 is better than 1 in 3.
Right.
Along comes DNA, 1 in 80 million. That's like comparing somebody on a tricycle to somebody in a rocket ship. So I'm looking at this stuff, and I'll never forget, it was February 5th, 1987. I go to this lust murder. Vilma Ponce, 20 years of age. Her daughter, Natasha, 2 years of age. 9 months pregnant. The savage that came in there destroyed her. It was a sex crime. He wanted to rape her. He stabbed her through the womb, 3 into the fetus. To me, that's a triple homicide. But that heathen who ran the DA's office didn't see it that way. I'm looking at the scene, and I'm looking and I'm reconstructing. I'm saying, hey, this guy cut himself. That's what happens in these frenzies because they get so crazy, and the knife gets wet, and the knife ends up cutting him. I says, this guy cut himself. This is what we're going to do. So what happens is we isolate the blood, droplets of blood. My detectives the next day go back. We had an eyewitness who saw somebody who matched the description. Now, interestingly, and a lot of people don't know this, the primary suspect in our case was the common law husband. Why? He had a history of drug use, a history of domestic violence. There was no forced entry. It's looking towards him, okay? And when the family finds out, they say he did it. He calls the police when he comes home and finds the body, all right? But his story is so convoluted, we think he's full of crap, all right? He said his brains are scrambled from the drugs he used. We end up clearing him. See, part of the investigative process is excluding suspects as well as including suspects. He didn't do it. Who did? We come up with a suspect, Joseph Castro. The next day, he had his hair shaved, right? Different outfit. He got rid of the bloody clothes, but he got a fresh cut on his hand. Bring him in for investigations, right? He comes in voluntarily. And while he's being interviewed, detectives see blood on his left wrist. And the watch is filled with blood. The pig never took a bath. He's wearing the blood of Vilma Ponce and Natasha on his watch. You need to have your watch? Oh, I needed my watch. Well, we have a drawer full of watches. Take your pick. Here's your pick. I says, bring that watch to Life Codes Corporation. We're going to do DNA analysis. The lab can't do this. The FBI can't do this. We're going private. I'll authorize the billing. Goes up to Life Codes Corporation. Comes back. It matches. All right? Now the fun begins. This is the first DNA case. The 2 defense attorneys from the Bronx, Scheck and Neufeld, they've been using DNA to get people off, but they don't want it as a tool. You know why the defense doesn't want it? Because it takes the gamemanship out of the trial. Look, you know who the governor was at the time? Mario Cuomo. Mario Cuomo is no friend of the police. Mario Cuomo's defense-oriented. He puts these 2 clowns in charge of a commission to see whether or not the state of New York should use DNA technology. Well, science prevailed. And Joseph Castro was found guilty. But here's the scary part. We had another similar homicide in another building he was assigned to clean 1 year earlier. Guess what? It matched him, the DNA. We had a serial killer that didn't even know it. So now you ask how I incorporate. I've become a microbiologist because I got to learn the science because now I left the police department and part of what I'm doing is teaching. The firm hired me to be a consultant, an investigative consultant to talk about DNA across the world. Now I'm learning about different cases. I'm opening cases for this firm to build their database. You see where we're going with this? So what you just said, I'm learning and I'm taking it forward. I got involved in so many cases, Mike, with this DNA that I opened up across the United States, including BTK. Sound familiar?
Yes.
The bound, torture, and kill. A lot of people don't know this. I was teaching in Wichita in 1988. when all of a sudden, who emerges from the past but BTK? He got excited. He got excited about this rape murder of a woman and her daughter. So he wrote a letter to the police, I'm back. He didn't do it. But the fact that he wrote a letter means he's around someplace. In 1974, the Otero homicide, the whole family was wiped out. The mother, the father, the little brother, little Josephine, 11 years of age. He hangs her from the basement sewer pipe and masturbates on her. They had a lot of evidence. Can you help us out? I says, give me that evidence from the Otero homicide. I bring it back to life codes. In 1988, we had a DNA print on the unknown BT Kayla. We could biologically and molecularly link him to the Otero homicides. Nobody knew about it. In 2004, when he reemerged, I get back involved with them, all right, because I had taught all their homicide people. Very interesting.
Full circle. And I had no idea.
Full circle.
Disturbing, but not because of anything you did, obviously, because of these animals, but ultimately very rewarding in terms of the utilization, rather, to be able to capture them in the first place. And it's like, oh my! And I remember that story because I heard a podcast episode on it recently with that very homicide being described, and it's just, it's savagery in its purest form. And I'll talk about the mental aspects. You kind of touched on it earlier, but I'll expand on it momentarily. But he was out west primarily, but New York had its own version of the Zodiac Killer for a while. It was running around committing homicides.
We had the New York version wasn't as intelligent, I can tell you that. I remember I was on TV with that. I was on TV with that case, and no comparison to the real Zodiac. And the Zodiac to this day is a mystery. I've spoken to a writer who actually believes he knows who the Zodiac Killer is, and he's put together a pretty impressive circumstantial package on who the actual Zodiac Killer is. Very interesting. Loaded with politics and loaded with all kinds of possible lawsuits, so he can't go public with it. But it makes a lot of sense. And this is for me, serial killers. They are a unique breed. They're all psychopaths,
of course,
and they don't have any feeling for their victims whatsoever. The victim's only a prop in their sexual fantasy, and when they're finished with the fantasy, they discard the prop just like it was a piece of garbage. That's their mentality. The Long Island serial killers, you had Rodney Harrison on, didn't you?
Yes, that was my last episode.
Okay. In 2010, December 10th, 2010, I was in Fox News when that case broke. And I called him a serial killer. And this Inspector Neubauer from Suffolk County had a coroner. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I said, yes, I do. Because only a select number of serial killers maintain a burial ground. And I named them right on the air. Okay. 4 of them right off the top of my head. You expand that scene, you're going to find more bodies. What happened? They expanded the scene. They found more bodies. I'm not saying I could have solved it, but I took a rash of crap when I identified him as a serial killer, and I said he's local, right? But everything I said turned out to be true. And Rodney Harrison reopened that case, and they made progress. But early on, people were calling me at my house because they got my number off my website. They were calling me. I said, you can't call me. I'm not the police anymore. You got to call the police. We don't trust the police. Well, see, why do you trust me? I'm a civilian. No, we've seen you on television. We know who you are, right? I said, well, I'll give me the information. I would send the information out. It was like, it was horrible. I mean, and I'm not criticizing all of the Suffolk homicide cops because I taught some of those people. They're great cops. Right. They were being neutralized by their high command, okay, and by a district attorney who shouldn't be there. And they were being short-stopped because at one point, I actually was communicating with Suffolk County trying to get information. And I got this secretary, right? And she goes, who are you? I said, well, I'm just a retired homicide detective, but I have information I want to give you to detectives. Well, they're very busy. I said, well, can you have them call me? No, you tell me what you have, right? I said, what is your name? She goes, secretary. I said, oh, you nasty person, you. So that was the problem. They were being short-stopped. So,
yeah, there was a lot wrong back then, as you said, with the high command. That's a different story for a different day. Investigations that led to Mr. Burke's downfall in particular. But, you know, I kind of go back. There's a song by Jane's Addiction, one of my favorite bands. Ted just admitted about Ted Bundy, to your point about props. Opening line of the song that Perry Farrell sings, the camera's got them images, camera's got them all, nothing shocking. To these individuals, nothing shocking. It's just another day, and that's the scary part. And Rex Heuermann, to your point, I mean, listen, I will word this carefully because he hasn't gone through trial yet, I don't believe. He's alleged at this point. But if it turns out to be true through trial that he did these things, Rex Heuermann was a guy who was living a normal life as an architect in New York City, seemingly regular guy with the family out on Long Island. This is what he was doing at night. And you have victims going back all the way, again, allegedly at his hand, to 1993. So this was a quite literally a 30-year stretch that finally culminated in an arrest for a variety of different reasons. I was going to ask you, by the way, because it's almost like you never left, since you're still so heavily involved in teaching. When exactly did you retire from the NYPD?
I retired, and I had to retire right after Larry Davis. It was 1987 when I committed commandicide. I was no longer persona non grata. But before I left, I got the first DNA case done. Okay, I investigated a police officer homicide. And because I'm a homicide cop, I don't get mad, I get even. That bill for DNA didn't come in until after I retired. $5,000. I said, goodbye. All right, you got it. The other thing was that chief was an arrogant son. He would always saddle me with report. Oh, you're an author. You wrote a textbook. You can do this report for me. So I would do the report, and my name. I'd bring it to him. He'd look at it and go, yeah, okay. Take your name off and have the secretary go and put my name on it. I said, okay, no problem. One of the things I picked up at the FBI Academy was something called the systematic buzzword game. All right? Like 3 columns, like a Chinese restaurant. And what you do is you pick a word from each column. It's called wordmanship. Systemized digital projection. Synchronized, monitored flexibility. Doesn't mean shit. These are 3 words. It was designed by a bureaucrat back in 1970, a 63-year-old public health service. He was so upset with the old bureau speak that he made up his own thing. So it was the annual corruption report, supposed to be prepared by the chief, nobody else, because he's the borough commander. He gives me the borough commander report to do for him. So I do it, right? I says, I'm going to fix him. I'm leaving next month. He doesn't know that. So I got this thing with the words, and I used 3 or 4 of these things throughout the report. Okay? Take your name off, put my name on. Goes downtown. Well, apparently somebody downtown had the same list from the FBI Academy. All right? He got his ass in a ringer. He came back. What kind of bullshit did you put in my report, Geberth? No. I was trying to make you look good, Chief. That's what you do to maintain your equilibrium. You know, you think of things to do to just like make you laugh, all right? Because that is funny.
No, I mean, listen, if you don't laugh, you'll cry. And that was the aspect I wanted to touch on with you. I mean, let's talk about it. A lot of cops across the board, even if they never work as a detective in homicide, firemen too, you see it. They see a lot of things. Unfortunately, some of them aren't able to deal with it as well. They turn to other things like the bottle that doesn't help. And you're seeing a lot of guys and gals commit suicide, you know, and it's terrible.
It's a big problem.
It's a huge problem. I mean, we're not that far removed from 10 cops in New York City in 2019 committing suicide. We had a suicide, I believe, a couple days ago of an NYPD.
A couple days ago, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and it's very sad to see. So you talked about it earlier, but expand on it here. To the guys and the gals that may be struggling with what they're seeing, you know, what advice would you give them on how to deal with it the right way and how to get that help they need?
Well, peer counseling seems to be the best thing for people that are in law enforcement because they don't really trust outside clinicians. Yeah. So if you have someone who is in service, who has gone for higher education, psychology, okay, master's degree, maybe even a PhD, they can relate much better to the uniform force and the police officers than people from the outside. Because we see things differently. Okay, just like we have police humor. It isn't humorless to people outside the police. To us, it's funny. Okay, having someone like that as a peer counselor to talk to them is so important. Also, your family life. You know, what a lot of happens with a lot of cops, I can't tell my wife this because I don't want to. I told my wife everything. Why? Because she had my six. She's my childhood sweetheart. We've been married 60 years. We grew together. I went back to school. She went back to school. She became a clinical social worker. I became whatever I am. But we have this communication and we talk. It's so important because you got to talk it out. You can't keep it bottled up. And you think you're doing somebody else a favor by not talking to them. You're really not. You're really doing a disfavor to them. All right. And that's just a personal perspective. Now, I worked with a guy from the New York State Police who was a counselor, and he was a clinical social worker and also a detective commander. All right. We team taught together. He was excellent as he talked to these officers in the class. Excellent, because he hit on all these different things that you wouldn't think about. So important. And my reputation, that cops would tell me stuff they wouldn't tell their own family. I'm saying, well, listen, I'm happy you shared that with me, but don't you think you need to do this, this, and this without being critical? All right. And I'll tell you, it helped a lot of people. And I love hearing the success stories when they come back. That's the main thing. That's what you want. You want to hear good stuff. You want to hear there was a good outcome.
Yeah.
Not a bad outcome.
Yeah, I mean, and I know a lot of people talk about breaking the stigma with mental health. It's important because I get it. I mean, listen, police, especially, you know, they're designed in a certain way, or they're trained in a certain way to protect those around them. And sometimes I've heard guys talk about how that's the reason they don't want to open up and share things. They want to protect those they love about by not sharing the gory details of the job.
Yeah.
But if you bottle it all up too long, and I had experiences like that in my life, I'm not on the job, but, you know, bottling things up, you spiral. And, you know, if you're not able to get yourself out of that spiral, that's how we lose these guys. And my first question after I hear about these suicides is why, why? But, you know, there's a lot of reasons ultimately.
Well, I can tell you this from personal experience. These people do not forecast that they're going to commit suicide.
No.
That's a private thing. What they construct in their own mind how this is going to be better for them, their family, and everybody else.
Yeah.
Because they had this suicide ideation. Now, suicide ideations are dangerous because if you dwell on them, they begin to make sense. All right? And that's what you can't get in everybody's head. And I feel bad for the surviving family members because what did I do wrong? How come I didn't recognize it? Why didn't I know? Because they don't forecast. That's the problem.
Yeah, I know. We've lost too many good people, unfortunately, to that. You know, on a more positive note, I will say, you've been retired, of course, since the mid 80s, but as you saw the crime rate, particularly the homicide rate, drop, and a lot of it due to the work of New York City police detectives. And then I have another question for you, too, before the rapid fire. It got as low as 289 in 2018. It went back up again, and unfortunately recently, but it got as low as 289 from 2000 plus in 1990. That's got to warm your heart, for lack of a better way to word. And I know that sounds sappy, but think about where the city was, and especially you investigating a lot of these killings, to where it got to, thanks to the advances of what NYPD detectives were doing and the work that was finally being recognized and the shackles that were being taken off to allow them to do it.
No, don't think we're dealing with crack cocaine. Crack cocaine overnight turned people into killers and drug addicts that had never intended to be killers or drug addicts. Right. It was a very potent drug. And with the advent of crack cocaine, our homicides went off the charts. Okay, we're up to 450 homicides in the Bronx in 1988. 88,
oh, it's the Wild Wild West. Yeah. It was the OK Corral back then.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, though, in all honesty, my perspective of what's wrong is we are not addressing the small quality of life things. That's the problem. If you don't nip this crap in the bud, it's going to block. It's like having a toothache and not going to the dentist. Now you have an abscessed tooth. Mm-hmm. This stuff has to stop. And this woke district attorney stuff and woke governor stuff does not work. You're not doing these people a favor by not putting them in jail. In fact, you're doing the community a disservice by putting those people back out, because you're putting the community at risk with someone who should be in a a controlled environment that they can't hurt other people. Somehow that became a racial thing, which was not racial. And I saw that with racializing homicide. You can't racialize homicide. It doesn't matter what color you are, what creed, it's a murder. Okay? In the Bible, they talked about Cain and Abel. This is not new. But the things that are not being done, it's almost criminal. It's almost criminal that a guy like Alvin Bragg could be a district attorney when he is hiding the numbers and not prosecuting people. The cops can only do so much. The cops are not the answer. It's got to be both the community, the police, and the system. The system has to work. And the system's not working. You can't have somebody with 5, 6, 7, 8 felonies walking around the street. No wonder people are getting hurt. But I'm not in charge.
Cop got killed last year because of that same reason. The guy that killed him was a guy, as you said, with a bunch of priors and got pulled over on a traffic stop, Jonathan Diller, and ended up shooting and killing the since posthumously promoted Detective Diller. Well, the other thing I'll ask you before we get to the rapid fire, and it's been a great conversation with you, so much ground has been covered. You were retired by this point, but nevertheless, I wanted to pick your brain on it. The largest crime scene that New York City ever had and ever will have, World Trade Center in 2001. I mean,
absolutely.
It was a recovery mission, yes. At one point as the towers burned, it was a rescue mission too. But after the collapses, it was, until the last piece was removed in May of 2002, the world's largest crime scene. As a homicide investigator, where you have so many victims, some of which were never even found, sadly, where do you even start with something like that?
Well, I'll tell you right now, it's not a one-person job, okay? This is a multiple agency, multiple person operation. Now, my son, who followed my footsteps, became a homicide detective. He was collecting body parts at the landfill.
Staten Island, fresh kills, yeah.
All right, that fresh kill.
Yep.
And sadly, he ended up getting colon cancer, all right?
Oh.
That if he wasn't thinking like a cop, because his wife had to go for some sort of medical procedure. He says, yeah, you better sign me up. I was down at 9/11. Well, guess what? They caught that cancer just before it breached the colon wall. Took out 2.5 feet of colon, right? He's cancer-free today.
Good.
But I almost lost him. I said, I'm working for God, Thank God that he had this process done. We have lost a lot of people since 9/11 from the same attack.
Well, remains to be seen. That's for sure. We don't know, but yeah, I'm sorry to hear, but I'm glad he's healthy now. I'm glad he's cancer free because, I mean, think about it. I mean, even the FDNY lost 343 members, firefighters, on 9/11 in the collapse of the towers. I never thought that number would be surpassed, but the amount of firemen who have since died for that agency alone of 9/11 related cancer have surpassed the 343 that died on that day. Which
well, you know what? The 343 died because that building was considered indestructible. When I was a cop in the 14th precinct, when I was a sergeant in the 14th precinct, and we had bomb runs at the World Trade Center, we always reported to the lobby of Building 1 because it was considered indestructible. And that's where the high command was when that building came down.
Yeah.
All right? Mm-hmm. That's what's so scary.
Yeah.
And everybody knows where they were on 9/11. Ask anybody from New York, where were you on 9/11? They know exactly where they were. I was in Dallas teaching a homicide school. When my coordinator ran in and said, a plane hit the World Trade Center, I stopped the class, a moment of silence for these poor souls, thinking it was an accident. 15 minutes later, second plane hit, we're under attack. I'm going, oh my God, where's my kids? Where's my trooper son? Where's my detective son? Where's everybody? And you couldn't call New York City. You couldn't call the phone lines.
Phone lines were down. The antenna was on top of the North Tower. So I was going to ask you, I mean, listen, you retired in the 80s, but 23 New York City cops died that day. Did you happen to know any of them from prior dealings or not really?
No, I knew a couple by reputation, but I didn't know them personally. Mm-hmm. All right.
Mm-hmm. Those being, if you don't mind naming them? Those cops being, if you don't mind naming them?
No, but civilians who died came from my neighborhood. Worked in the World Trade Center.
Right.
In fact, quite a few people in Rockland County, all right, because that's where I lived in Rockland County, lost loved ones.
Man. Well, I'm glad you went into that with me. Again, like I said, it was such the evidence collection that went down there, though, under the circumstances was just incredible, ultimately. And It was precarious work. It was not easy work. It was gut-wrenching work, but they did a great job. And with your experience, I wanted to definitely pick your brain on it. The other thing I just wanted to briefly dive into as well with you is when you look back at just your NYPD years, it was quite the adventure. It was quite the era for the city. Time machines existed. I like asking this. And you can go back to any particular moment in time in your career, any chapter of your career. Where's Vernon Geberth going back to tomorrow if he can go back in time?
You mean before I became a homicide expert? I love the TPF. I thought that was the sharpest unit going. They were really great. You talk about synchronized, all people on the same page. No Mickey Mouse characters. No problem children, because they'd be taken out. All right, they'd be ostracized. But if I had a time machine, I'd go back and use the forensics that we have today that we didn't have back when I was there. Okay, the ability to solve crimes. There were a lot of unsolved homicides because we didn't have the tools. So a murder cop's fantasy to jump into a time machine and bring back the stuff from 2025, and look what we can do now.
Not bad. Not bad. This has been quite the conversation. The hour and a half has flown by, so we'll go into the rapid fire now. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. You can say pass if you want. They're not necessarily hard questions. I joke they are, but they're not. First thing is favorite New York City bar or restaurant after a long day on the beat.
Yeah, my wife's cooking. My wife's a fantastic cook. I don't go to many restaurants because my wife's the best cook in the world. But if you want a good steak, Ruth Chris.
All right,
okay,
there you go.
I never saw anything like it. You tell them what kind of steak you make, and it comes out. I put it on the grill. It doesn't look anything like that.
Listen, I concur with that. I still live at home. I got mom's cooking, so there ain't no cooking like home cooking. That's a great answer, and shout out to Mrs. Geberth. We kind of talked about it too, but rather be a case you had, or just a case you heard about, besides the ones we talked about. What's another really memorable homicide case that you taught in your seminars?
I have so many homicide cases in my file and in my head that each of them could be distinguishable for any number of factors: forensics, the family, the victim, the interaction, the bizarreness, right? Or the publicity. So there isn't one case. There's a multiple cases. But if I had to think of the most bizarre case that I had, it was the guy who fed his face to the dogs. All right. It came in on a call from the North Central Bronx. We need detectives at the hospital, and it came in from the crime scene. I responded to the hospital first to take a look at this mess, and went to the crime scene and going, this is not an assault, but I don't know what happened. They had corralled 3 dogs, a shepherd and 2 puppies. Well, as I'm reconstructing what happened in the scene, I see a smash mirror and I see a recliner. Guy's under the influence of PCP. What he does, under the influence of PCP, he begins to peel his face from his skull, digs his eyeball out, and what's he doing with the face? He's feeding the dogs. How do I know that? There's no face in the scene. I have to say face, right? I ordered those dogs to be brought down to ASPCA and pump their stomachs. Come back with a bag full of face. I go to the hospital. This guy's got gauze all over him, right? I said, I got to get a statement. Who's going to be a witness? That cleared everybody away. What happened to you? Like a mechanical mouth. I never saw anything like this in my life. In fact, I thought I lost it. So now I'm losing it. I'm talking to a cadaver, and the cadaver's talking back. What made this case unique is that Thomas Harris took that out of my textbook and created Mason Verger, Hannibal. Remember the movie? Yes. That's my case. So that's the most bizarre thing I can think of.
I've heard a lot of stories on the show that might take the cake. Oh my goodness.
Well, I followed it through. I watched the facial reconstruction with you, a pectoral flap, and they patch it to the face, and they cut, and they redo it. So I put the whole thing together forensically.
Oh my God. But it showed up with the bag at the hospital. Here's your face, by the way. Here you go, buddy. You lost this. Funniest or third question, rapid fire. Funniest or most surprising moment during a field investigation? Doesn't have to be homicide, from any part of your career.
Well, I remember Halloween evening getting a report this man came. He was a Frenchman. He couldn't speak English, but he was reporting that the body of his fiancée, sister, was found in his apartment. I'm going, oh. So we go there, and he said he locked it. So we go back to the apartment, and it's really wild. So they got one of those lava lamps burning, and it's very dim. And this gal is laid back, 25 years of age, and her face is clown white, except for the blood coming, looked like something out of a movie. I'm saying to myself, I'm tiptoeing through, trying not to disturb anything. I says, if this woman jumps up and says, Happy Halloween, I'm going to smack the shit out of her. That's what it turned out to be, a homicide. But it wasn't a homicide. It looked like a homicide, but it was a suicide. It was very bizarre. And then the most funny thing, that's funny, the most significant was, I had another case down in Louisiana where this offender had been stalking this young woman, and he kills her. He knifes her multiple times, and he's fleeing the scene. It's Good Friday. He sees a roadblock, which he thinks is for him. It was for the Way of the Cross procession for Good Friday. He runs up to the police. I'm a witness to a homicide. He got caught. God got him. Full of blood. Yeah.
Goodness, you can't make it up. Only in New York City. Fourth, we kind of talked about this too, but you can expand on it. Most uplifting moment in mentoring detectives, either in New York City or around the world.
When they call me up and say, Vernon, thank you for telling us what to do. We solved this case because of you. I said, no, you solved the case because of you. I just gave you the tools. And I have had multiple conversations like that across the country. It is very fulfilling if you're like me and you have a passion for this.
Of course, and that passion is evident. The last question, the rapid fire, doesn't have to be homicide. You know, in New York City, it's different from place to place, but we'll use the NYPD as an example. Detective is the only rank that you don't test for, at least for now. It's a rank that you earn at the, of course, at the discretion of the higher ups, mainly the police commissioner, and you earn it basically on merit. Every other rank after that you do test for up until you get to, I believe, captain or inspector. So for those that are aspiring to wear the gold shield, at least in New York City, as you did for many years, what advice would you give them?
True to yourself. Don't be influenced by the mob. Okay? Remember, the most important case that you have is the case with your name on it. If it goes good, don't worry, somebody else will steal it. If it goes bad, you own it. Remember that.
Important advice across the board. Lieutenant, this has been a lot of fun. Stick around. We'll talk off air. Before I say goodbye to the audience, anything you'd like to shout out or promote?
Well, I don't want to promote anything except if you want to see some interesting police stories, The Godfather of Homicide, it's on Amazon, and it is very fulfilling. But I don't want to promote anything. What I would like to say is God bless people in law enforcement, because we need all the help we can get. And for the people in the city of New York and the NYPD, stay strong.
Yes.
Stay strong.
Indeed. Thank you very much. This has been great. For those of you that are tuning in, of course, you're going to hear this on a Friday. As I mentioned before, this is being recorded on Monday, July 21st. Coming up next on the Mike to New Haven podcast, we haven't done any FDNY shows since my comeback, but we will. A couple of them on deck. First thing's going to be, he was an EMS chief in the New York City Fire Department for several years, had an extensive career between New York City Health and Hospitals EMS, and later on the New York City Fire Department upon the merger of the agencies in 1996. For another volume of The Best, the Bravest, it'll be Chief Jerry Gombo. And then right after that, someone who had extensive career primarily in the FDNY's fire marshal's office. He was a police officer first with the NYPD, moved over to FD, and enjoyed a career doing several different investigations of his own as part of that great unit. That's Don Mormino, who will join me again for another volume of The Best, the Bravest. So a couple of Best, the Bravest shows coming up, July 28th, August 1st, exclusively. Please be there. 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't miss it. In the meantime, on behalf of Lieutenant Commander Vernon Geberth, I am Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone, and stay safe. Have a great weekend.